WorldDenver talks today with Christopher de Bellaigue, who is a journalist and author who specializes in the Middle East. Your most recent book is really very interesting, and it's called The Patriot of Persia, and is the biography of the Prime Minister Muhammad Mossadegh. What brought you to Iran, to writing a book about this Prime Minister?
Well, I went to Iran as a journalist in 2000, and at the time the country was being liberalized, it was being reformed. And so the environment there for foreign journalists was, for the first time since the revolution, quite a propitious and a favorable one. So I was able to take advantage of that. It was a fascinating place. And I think I've never really come across a place where the intellectual ferment and the intellectual curiosity was so great and so intense at that time. It was really extraordinary. And I stayed there and I started writing. And I wrote a book about my time in Iran and also about Iran since the revolution. But after that, I was, and after a couple of other projects, I was searching for an idea, and I'd always had it in the back of my mind, this idea that this man, Muhammad Mossadegh, had not been given a true Anglo-Saxon biography. You know, the British and American tradition of writing a cradle-to-grave biography of someone isn't really something that you find in the Middle East. And it's a tradition that I've always valued and appreciated, because you get the life and you get the times.
There are a variety of views of Mohammed Mossadegh. Can you explain why he was so controversial?
He's very polarizing, as you say. He began his life a Persian aristocrat, but he watched as Iran, or Persia, you can call it whichever you want, modernized. And the shadow of the imperial powers, Britain and Russia, was cast over this process of modernization throughout the first half of the 20th century. And Mossadegh always felt that two things needed to happen for Iran to achieve proper independence and achieve greatness. And these were that the country should be free of the imperial powers, properly free, not just notionally free. And secondly, that the Shah should have the powers only of a constitutional monarch. And the reason why he became very controversial is that in 1951 he became Prime Minister at a very advanced age, having overseen the nationalization of Iranian oil, which was then in the hands of the British. And the British were giving Iran a paltry royalty. They were repatriating most of the profits from Iranian oil. And also they were using this toehold they had on Iranian soil to exert all sorts of other influence over Iranian national life. And Mossadegh found that unacceptable. So he nationalized the industry, the British cried foul, and after 2 years of intense diplomatic, military, covert dispute and conflict between the two sides, the British enlisted the help of the United States. And they said, this guy is tipping Iran into communism, you've got to come and get rid of him. So the Americans sent the CIA to get rid of Mossadegh in a coup. It was the silver bullet that everyone was very pleased with at the time, because Mossadegh was gone, the Shah was stronger, and the Shah was the great friend of the United States. But over time, it's come to be seen as a great mistake.
Do you think that he has been romanticized at all in Iran?
Definitely. He has been romanticized no less than a Lincoln or a Jefferson or a George Washington. And like those great leaders, he had his faults and he had his idiosyncrasies and he made his mistakes. And the job of a historian is to try and apply the values of objectivity to the subject. And although I am an admirer of Mossadegh, and although as a Briton I feel a strange reverse affinity towards him because he hated the British, he absolutely loathed them, he would certainly have found it very amusing that a Briton was writing his biography. Despite these feelings that I have for him, I've tried to apply that principle of objectivity to describe him as I think he was.
What is the significance of retelling his story now? What does it have to do with the current state of affairs in Iran?
Mossadegh is an example of the truth that for some people, history continues to bleed, it continues to resonate. And with Mossadegh, it's certainly true. The coup of 1953 led to 25 years or more of the Shah's increasingly pitiless dictatorship. And the Americans, and to a lesser extent the whole of the West, was heavily implicated in that dictatorship. And in 1979 the revolution came, as we all know, and the American embassy was taken over. And to a large extent that was a kind of historical reckoning. The hostage takers were paying the Americans back for all the support they'd given to the Shah, and particularly for this coup d'etat in 1953, which had changed the course of Iranian history. And nowadays, you see, well, Mossadegh was interested in oil. Oil was his energy. Now you have the nuclear situation. And you can draw tenuous parallels between what's happening now and what happened then. There are important differences. But at the same time, you can say that we've been here before.
How would you see that Mossadegh would view the Republic today?
Well, in fact, it's very easy to attribute views to someone who's dead because he can't answer back. What I do know is that a lot of Mossadegh's supporters came to power immediately after the revolution. After the revolution, there was a tussle for power between the more liberal, the more secular anti-Shah elements and the harder-line Islamic fundamentalists and the supporters of Ayatollah Khomeini. And a lot of Mossadegh's former colleagues came to power, and gradually, over a period of time, they were eased out of power. And they lost that battle, and Iran did not become the more secular, the more liberal country that they wanted it to become. It became a much sterner Islamic republic.
Do you feel that between the secular and the religious communities?
If you say that there's a division between the secularists and the Islamists in Iran, which clearly there is, you can also say that on the question of nationalism, on the question of the nuclear program, there is a great degree of consensus. And it always interests me that some people in the West, policymakers and the like, would dearly love there to be some kind of regime change in Iran because they think that it would make their life, the diplomatic life of their country and relations with Iran much easier. And I always say to them that you should be careful what you wish for, because based on my knowledge of Iran, anyone who came to power, anyone who had an iota of public support would be nationalistic, would be America's rival for influence over the Middle East, and would also maintain that nuclear program. No Iranian politician of whatever stripe could easily give up that nuclear program.
In response to Iran's nuclear activities, the U.S. and a number of other countries have imposed increasingly restrictive sanctions on Iran. What are the impacts of these sanctions, and do you believe they're having their intended effect?
Well, they were designed to focus Iranian attention on the demands of the international community, which is to give up enrichment. There is no evidence that this has succeeded so far. A recent congressional report even states it very boldly that so far the stated aims of the sanctions policy have not been achieved, namely to get Iran to comply with the international community, and particularly the Americans. What we do see is increasing hardship in Iran. We see that the Americans and their allies have been very successful not only at imposing their own sanctions, and there have been 9 congressional acts and 25 executive orders, in addition to all the EU, all the other countries and the UN sanctions. In addition to all that, the Americans have been extremely good at persuading entities, big and small, to cease doing business with Iran. And if you look at that awful precedent which was set by sanctions against Iraq after the first Gulf War, which had the effect of impoverishing and destroying the country, but not of dislodging Saddam, then you can see that if taken to its conclusion, just what might happen in Iran.